just testing yourself and see what you can do without it is a lot of fun. And, I'd recommend it. Like, even if it's just like, not client work, but, personal stuff. Like if you're just doing like studies or something, I know a lot of artists tend to do studies and, 100% understand why, because it's kind of the same thing. It's just like testing yourself. Like, can I actually do this without the support of a program? And there may be like situations as well, like in your work, like client work, where they've asked you not to take it so far in 3D, and then you may find yourself in trouble then as well, because you've relied so heavily on it. So it's nice. It's kind of a nice balancing act, I would say.
Please welcome concept artist Marco Gorlei, our fantastic guest for this episode, where we discuss the nature of art, the art of nature, and the way they intertwine in ways that provide the most potent of fuel for artists. Marco also shares his deep passion of travel and history and his influence on his work, to also revealing his experiences of making big career changes, from the positive impact of moving abroad to making the jump from studio life to freelance, and much more. Let's go. Right, hey everyone, welcome back to the Lens Squared podcast. I'm delighted to welcome on special guest today, Marco Gorlei. Welcome, Marco.
Hey man, what's going on?
Good, thank you. So we're recording this on a weekend in the middle of the year. Before we get into your little, I guess, like, hopefully not little, but like origin story, how's your year been so far? I mean, we're like halfway through the midpoint. For me, it feels like it's still in January and I'm shitting myself because half the year's gone. But what's your year like been so far?
Yeah, it's crazy how fast it's gone. Actually, like it felt like the beginning of the year just the other day, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been quite a chill year. I've been kind of freelancing mainly, so yeah, I would say it's going quite well. But it's also been a good year for personal development. I've had a bit more free time than usual, so it's actually been kind of a nice change of pace, I would say.
Interesting. That's a lot of good things we can dive deep into soon. But for the guests that we have, a lot of our guests are like students who are up and coming, starting off completely fresh, also some seasoned veterans as well. So welcome to everybody. But for those who are not familiar with yourself, if you wouldn't mind just giving us a backstory to your journey and who you are.
Yeah, so I'm originally from South Africa. I've kind of always been interested in video games, really, and I think drawing has kind of just been the only thing I've had going for me, to be honest. So
Okay.
I kind of just leaned into it at around high school, and from there I found out about FZD, School of Design, Feng Zhu School, and I decided I needed to go. I needed to do something because I was kind of lacking the self-discipline to improve by myself. So I kind of needed something to kind of drill that into me. So FCD really helped with that. So that was around 2014. After that, I pretty much took like a year's break because I was just absolutely destroyed. Around 2015, 2016, I started to get my first freelance jobs, like kind of big titles too. So I managed to work on Ghost in the Shell, the remake. And from there, I decided I needed to leave South Africa. As much as I love the country, it doesn't have much of an industry for entertainment design. So I was trying my best to get into any company, really. And I managed to get into Adam Hawk in the UK. Stayed there for about 5 years. After that, I was at Ubisoft for 2 years, and now I'm pretty much back to freelance. So now I'm kind of really settled in the UK. I really like it here. And yeah, that's pretty much
Cool.
where we're at.
So UK is home now, or for the foreseeable?
I would say so. Yeah.
Sick. So how long have you been here? Like, when did you? Has it been like you said 5 or so years, or has it been more?
It's been about 20. Yeah, so it's been about 8 years now in
Oh, okay,
total, I think. Yeah.
cool. And what was that like? Just like moving to a new place. Like, is that something that you growing up like wanted to do? Was that something like, okay, I want to see what the rest of the world like, or did that something not occur to you? Like thinking, I'm happy where I am, and let's just see what we're because like sorry, like normally like growing up and stuff with work, it's almost like it tends to be closer to where you are. Very rarely, like, do you know people who a lot of people move to go wherever they need to go to work and stuff. So yeah, what was that like for you?
So I don't think it was something I was expecting to do, but it ended up something that I had to do. Um, but I really enjoyed the move because South Africa, like relatively speaking, compared to like a lot of countries in Europe, it's quite a like new country. Since it was kind of settled and stuff like that. So there's not much like we've got a lot of natural history, but we don't have like a lot of man-made kind of history there. Everything's like from colonial era up. So being in England and just in Europe in general, where some things are super old, right? Like even going back to Roman times, and me being a fan of anything kind of historical, I just really kind of loved absorbing all of the kind of surroundings in the UK. And I've seen like many of the cities here. I've gotten around a bunch, and just yeah, I really like it. Just being in a place that kind of feel, I don't know, is that weird to say? Just a place that feels so old. It's like being at your like grandma's house or something.
Now, there's definitely something to that. Like, there's something about surroundings, whether it's man-made or natural, and even whatever kind of like how that's been curated or structured over time, whether it's by natural or man-made reasons. I definitely like. I've noticed that about me, like how surroundings influence me. I know some people whose mood changes in different surroundings, but they have no clue or would never think like, it's not the surrounding, it's within me or it's happening. Is that something that you're aware of? Does that happen to you?
I think it can definitely affect my mood. Like, I like getting out to nature whenever I can, and usually when that happens, I'm always feeling super inspired. Like usually, after I've had a holiday, there's like guaranteed personal work to follow because yeah, it just feels so refreshing that I don't know if it's the scenery or just the change of pace. Maybe it's a combination of both these things, but yeah, it definitely affects my mood because especially being a freelancer, it's quite easy to kind of just be trapped in your house and just being like an absolute caveman, not socializing with anyone.
Oh no, I mean, I totally agree. It feels like a cheat code almost, like when you go somewhere and you got all this visual information, it's giving you all the answers to every. All I gotta do is just change the shape of that and connect to that, and it's like, hey, I made something original, but it's just basically, just modifying what's around. But yeah, it's. When did is that something that you've always done? Because for me, that's something that I've learned to do. I was a lot of the things over my head, like you mentioned, obviously being in the UK, you've probably visited more iconic landmarks around the UK than I have, and I've been here my whole life. Because a lot of it's just over my head, it's home, and then even like things around my area, like where I live is nothing like, I guess, visually spectacular. But there's even spots where I used to walk past as a kid, and now look at it thinking that's really interesting, really cool. So is that something that you've trained yourself to do, or have you always been like that rate has been always on and locked in?
I think it's something that came over time for sure, because initially I would go to places but not really appreciate them, especially when I was younger.
Yeah,
for sure. But like you can find like really interesting details in even the most mundane thing. Like you can go into like even like a kind of I don't know how to say this really, but just like a, maybe like a more kind of downtrodden area, maybe not a not so touristy area, not just in the UK, but anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
And if you look close enough, you can actually find some really interesting stuff that probably most people would gloss over. But like as artists, we kind of we like, I think as we get older, we start nerding out about like the tiniest kind of details. So yeah, I think that's something that definitely developed over time for sure. Because initially, whenever I would go somewhere, it would just be like for holiday, and I would just get like super sunburns, and yeah, okay, cool. That was fun, but I didn't really learn anything.
Yes. But equally though, like, is sometimes like these things, especially like when you're doing it as a professional, you're trying to perfect a skill, you realize these gaps, and you realize, okay, I need to brush up on something or improve on something, and you go, oh yeah, that's providing the answer, and you just work on it and then build that level up that way. So did that happen organically for you? Like you realize that, okay, I'm going to use these visual references around me and use that in a smarter way, or was that taught to you?
A bit of both, I would say. So one thing I really liked about my time at FZD was Feng Zhu would kind of go on these like rants while doing demos. And a lot of the time he was talking about reference. And I don't think I truly understood what he was talking about at first, because it's like, yeah, okay, reference, like I'll just gather this and that, and that'll influence my image. But I don't think I was really kind of scrutinizing and really analyzing the reference in kind of a deep way. Like I was kind of paying no mind really to the design, and I kind of wasn't really understanding why things were the way they were. And something that's grown in me naturally over time is I would start to find out why things are actually like this, and dig a little bit deeper into these details. So yeah, initially taught to me, but I would say it's grown more organically over time as well.
Do you have a particular process now when you see something that triggers an idea, and like how you dissect whether it's reference or inspiration to get that to basic canvas?
Yeah, I like to gather reference into certain categories. So like I'll have my reference for mood. And whenever I'm looking for a reference for mood, I like to look at things that feel painterly, not necessarily in the sense that it's actually painted, but the mood feels kind of mystic and painterly, and almost like, I'm a big fan of things that kind of look ethereal in a way. So that's why most of my artworks are like really foggy, but yeah, I love that feeling. So that's always for my mood. And then for design, it's kind of a whole different story, right? So it's like, different things can influence your design. So you could find like a pattern on a building, and that could be like an interesting motif to build off of. Or you can find a archway that is designed in a specific way, and you can lean on that. So that's kind of the design category of things. But then there's also just like the pure technical photo reference that I'll need, because I tend to paint over my 3D quite a lot. I think in the end, the look of my artwork, it still feels quite 3D, but I don't like it to feel 100% raw 3D. I like that bit of human touch, because it took me a really long time to actually get into 3D. And before that, I was just using kind of photo bashing techniques. So I kind of need the really technical reference that I'll actually use in the images as well. So my ref board, like I know some people like to work with really kind of small ref boards, but mine, it usually ends up like a gigantic, just collage of just randomness, but it somehow works for me in the end.
That's fair enough. Like I get lost, so I'm one of those assets to keep it really small. I'll just like take a few of each particular category and be like, okay, just for my own sanity, like just, okay, I need to like rely on those and fall back in there. However, there is like a whole, if it was a physical space as opposed to pure ref, it'd be the whole room just covered in like papers and all that kind of stuff and files.
Just like, in those movies with like the detectives like piecing everything together. It's like
a couple of dead cats that I don't even know but ended up there as well.
Exactly.
But equally, like, So how big does yours get? Like, is it like you mentioned that it can get quite expansive? Give us an extreme example.
Okay, expansive but still manageable in my own way.
Sure.
Yeah. So I kind of know, I try to keep it organized, but I think if a random person had to look at it, they'll be really lost. But for me, I understand, what everything's purpose is.
Got it.
Yeah, but they can get quite big. Usually it starts off small though. So like if I'm in an ideation phase, I think I'll be more like you, where trying to keep things quite contained. I don't look at anyone else's artwork at that stage as well.
Yes.
Don't want to be influenced, which is something I actually used to do, but I've tried to stop doing that. But yeah.
So with that, like, what was there an epiphany that made you stop looking at existing artwork, or is that something that happened organically as well? Because I think we've all been for that phase, right? Like I know a lot of listeners have been for that phase where you kind of sleepwalk into it. We realize that this is mine, and then you realize actually I've just been trying to, like transplant or transpose what I'm seeing. So what was that like for you?
I think it's because when you're starting off, right, you're just so focused on the technical element. You're just trying to get good, right? So that's like the only thing on your mind. So I think it's like completely natural to be looking at other people's work. But the more experience you have, the more you kind of want to do your own thing. You start to realize that doesn't become so important anymore. What's more important is the interesting things you can pull from in the real world to make a unique idea. But yeah, I wouldn't feel bad about that, because I think it's something that's supernatural, because I think artists go through, varying stages throughout their journey, and there's always that one stage where, all they're kind of focused on it is just trying to get better as an artist. And of course, the best way to do that is to look at how the pros handle things. So.
Yeah, no, well put. Yeah, exactly. And did you ever get to that stage though where you thought like it was a negative thing?
Yeah, because when it starts to get into almost copying territory, which can happen quite easily if you're not careful, like maybe you'll unintentionally kind of copy their composition or copy the design even. I think that can get bad pretty quickly for your work. So, that's also partly why I'm trying so hard to steer away from that as well, because I don't want my art to feel like a copy of someone else's, even though I might really admire their work.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, like, it's impossible to not be inspired in general, because the whole thing, I mean, there's two aspects to being creative, is enjoying other people's creativity as well. And the only way to enjoy that is by looking at it. And when you see something, like, everyone has their favorite films and whatever it might be. And even if you're not a creative, like, those things still stick in the back of your mind and might influence just the way you act things or do things as well. So it's inevitable that it's going to like seep through, but it's also, and I think you nailed it as well. Like, you can harness it in a way where you can steer away from that, but still create something cool out of that as well. But when you were coming up, like, were there any particular creatives or artists that you were inspired by heavily, or did it shift and change as you discovered artists, or maybe were focusing on different projects?
Oh, so many. So actually, I used to be influenced from more kind of like artsy artists. So when I was studying, I was like into a lot of artists from like the kind of I guess like Japanese, Chinese kind of, that kind of theater, because they were just like so good with their brushstrokes. And for some reason, when I was coming up, that was like the only thing on my mind. Like, I just want to make amazing brushstrokes.
Yes.
So that's what I was looking at. But eventually it changed to more design focused stuff, and also more realistic art as well. I'm a big fan of Chase Stone's artwork, amazing illustrator. And he kind of captures that feeling that I look for too, which is, kind of painterly but realistic.
I like what you said there about just chasing like how to do good brushstrokes. That just took me back to growing up as well. Like that's how well, with anything, like I just get fixated on like, I want to know that particular technique.
Mm-hmm.
Not even specifically how someone used it, but like if I had that power, what could I do kind of thing. And then you just hunt for it as well. And then it chops and changes. Yeah. So yeah, you just took me back a little bit there with that as well. And I think that's also like, so do you ever reflect on like how you've developed over time? Like obviously we all do it from now and again, like it just happens naturally, but do you ever do it in a deliberate way where you take stock, almost audit yourself, that particular version of yourself, and then maybe change direction going forward?
I like to remind myself when I'm going through a particularly like negative phase.
Mm-hmm.
I like to look at my older stuff and just kind of just reflect on what my stuff used to look like versus what it's like now, and that kind of helps a little bit. But also in terms of subject matter, I reflect on that too quite a bit, because what I used to do was I would just my goal was just to make a cool image, but now I'm trying to develop like much larger projects with kind of consistent themes and consistent subject matter, and that is much harder to do, but it's a lot of fun because I'm always up for a challenge.
Yeah, that's a similar journey. I'm starting to like, I found myself heading towards, and I'm in that forest, and I'm definitely stuck in the trees, and I don't know where the entrance is. But I agree with you. There's like definitely a lot of joy in working on a wider project. So when did that start for you? Is that something that you've been doing more recently? Is it this year thing, or is that something that's always been like? Do you know you're always heading this way?
No, it's something that was quite recent. I want to say, like maybe at the start of like 2019, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So I tried one out, which was kind of I was going through a phase where I was really fascinated by not World War One, but pre-World War One battleships, because they had a really short lifespan. They went from kind of like steamships into like battleships. And from there, they got modernized super quickly. So the pre-dreadnought kind of phase of battleships, it's just like so fascinating to me because they all look super weird and experimental. They all have really, kind of like bulgy kind of hull designs. So they kind of look like bloated a little bit. They almost look like submarines. So I was trying to harness that inspiration, and I was trying to combine that with my love for kind of turn-based strategy games. I'm a huge fan of like really nerdy games, like kind of the Total War series and stuff.
Right.
Big naval battles and things like that. So I was just kind of trying to combine these two elements. And after having a small taste of, working on, just instead of one image, but like maybe like 3 or 4 images, I really enjoyed that, and I wanted to try it again. So the next one I tried was kind of a world based on pirates. I say pirates, but it's not really pirates. It's more that Age of Sail that kind of fascinates me.
Yes.
Yeah, and I've that one's been a bit more consistent than the pre-Dreadnought one, because I think I'm just a bit more into it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of what I've been developing these days. So
sick. No, super fascinating on many angles. Firstly, just nerding out over specific slices of history, and then realizing, like, that's something that I've noticed as well. Like wherever it might be, just iterations that groups of people or humans can go through in very quick periods of time based on a specific need. Like you mentioned, like, and how things quickly can change before they're like homogenized and kind of like just become the standard that we kind of know today. And like in a similar way, just talking about research as well, like definitely gone down some rabbit holes and realized that, wow, there's definitely a lot more than I thought would be on this. And there's way more scope. And it's cool because even like, obviously sometimes you can think, oh, there's no ideas or I've run out of ideas kind of thing. But if you like hyper focus on something that might seem very bland or mundane, like obviously like you mentioned World Wars, for example, those are very iconic in very many different ways. And it's almost like, well, what was ever as epic before that? Obviously that maybe in more ancient times, but like prior to that time, it kind of sheds a lot of light on so many things. But even like, I enjoy going to museums wherever I get to go, and there's always like, you see the artifacts, whether it's pots and pans or tools or whatever, and you just see the level of iteration that's gone on. Like we've always been designing, whether we realize it or not. Yeah. And it's absolute, I find, I'm sure you agree as well, like it's absolute gold for just project fuel.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's why, that's why it's more important to look at real things instead of other artists' work as well, because it's just like, yeah, you can just do like a random fantasy like image, or you can, really dig into like, why was this certain pot used as opposed to like that pot, which is like shaped a bit differently. And they all have like really specific purposes, and like you can pull really interesting things from that. Like you almost, it's like, I don't really want to say this, but like you don't have to be like too creative if you just look at what exists. Because
yeah, I mean, I guess like that's the perfect way to use reference, right? Like otherwise we wouldn't need it. We could just literally just throw out what we come up with, but we just tend to like just like kind of engineer what has already existed into something else. Have you been to the Natural History Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford, the natural history one?
I haven't been to Oxford yet. That's the one city that I really want to visit.
So there's I believe it's the Natural History Museum. It's got like a Pitt Rivers Museum. So natural history is obviously natural history, which is super cool. Obviously, it's always cool. Like just anything that's natural and like you see it in detail, as opposed to like running around and you can't really appreciate. Although it's dead, obviously, which is quite sad. But like its details, its intricacies, and how it works. For example, like they've got this elephant skeleton, whatever. Elephants without their flesh and skin look even way more, well, they're not scary, but they look scary, I think, without like their skulls, for example. I found them super creepy. The way their teeth look and the way their like tusks, where the housing is and stuff. It's perfect fuel for any kind of creature design. But
for sure,
behind there, or like towards the back, they've got like, like loads of artifacts from around the world from different eras. And I think on the top floor, they've just got weapons. So you got anything from like swords, armor, all the way around to like obviously like guns and stuff like that as well. And just even that, like we mentioned, the battleships, just seeing how these were effectively defense and killing machines have been tweaked and added, and some of them are like, how does that even work? Some of them are like, ouch, like if that ever happened on you, that's not good news. But yeah, just a little nerd out from me.
Oh, for sure. And actually, just adding to that, one thing I find extra fascinating are the designs that don't work.
Yes.
So just like speaking of battleships, like I think the French, they were experimenting with like some really weird designs that didn't work out, but they just look so like, even though they're probably like not functional at all, they just look so interesting to me. And it's also another thing you can kind of lean onto, like, things that look, so wild and don't work, but they're just interesting.
Yeah, I've noticed that with a lot of aircraft, which is basically the phase where like they were still figuring it out before they figured it out, and then now with like aircraft, I still find it super cool. With the little, that's at the point now, like a bit like Formula One cars, where unless it's a big change in regulation, which it isn't in aircraft because it's like it's not a sport or anything. It's just intricate little changes and little additions here and there, which I know that over as well. But when they're still trying to figure out, okay, we kind of can stay in the air for a long time. Now, how do we keep it for longer? How do we make it usable and all that kind of stuff? There's some odd, interesting, strange forms and shapes and trying to figure things out. I'm sure it was a nightmare to make at that time because maybe a lot of accidents and a lot of failures and budgets and all that kind of stuff. But for us to see from distance is super interesting. Another one that escapes my mind now, which I always found interesting was I'll come back to me in a second.
No
But
worries.
now when you see things like that, like when you see inspiration, obviously we've had a bit of a nerd out now and we can still continue to do so. How do you kind of like package that into something that's now usable?
Ooh. So I guess I will use like castles as an example, I think, because it's kind of easy to talk about. So what's interesting to me about castles is not necessarily the design of the castle, weirdly enough, but I really like castles that sit into the terrain in a really weird manner. For example, so like there are a lot of coastal fortifications. Like there's a Spanish coastal fort called El Moro, and it has a really interesting. It sits into the terrain in a really interesting way. It's almost like carved into the terrain, and so that's like an interesting detail of a castle that you don't normally see people try to attempt. And so it's kind of like looking at these really weird things that people would gloss over and trying to make a kind of concept out of that. So recently I attempted like a kind of bird's eye view of a kind of fort sitting on a kind of cliff top, right? And instead of just like the standard kind of castle design, I was looking at a lot of ruins and how they were sitting into this terrain, and I was really trying to blend these two elements, and whether that's succeeded or not is up to the viewer, but that's how I kind of attempted it. And so yeah, I think just finding these small interesting bits, no matter what they could be, and kind of leaning onto it and just kind of making it a bit more fantastical or a bit more sci-fi, and I think that usually leads to a lot of interesting results.
Sick. By the way, that's music to my ears. Like just finding that niche, finding that pocket that hasn't been either touched, that I guess that that fresh snow that no one's treaded on, and just basically make snow angels in it, whatever, and just go wild. Is that something that excites you though? Like, do you hunt for that, or is that just?
Yeah, I do.
Sick. What's that journey like? Because I can imagine it can get a bit, maybe unhealthy is a strong word to use, but you can get like very fixated and almost rack your brains trying to find these, or does it come easy to you?
I think the biggest issue is that you can go down that rabbit hole and it can end up wasting a lot of time sometimes. So sometimes you just have to kind of give yourself that deadline, like up to this point, I've had enough. And I think it also comes from experience as well. Like the more you work, the more you realize what you need versus what you don't. So at certain points you can just be like, okay, I've got enough. I've definitely got enough to work with, so I can stop here. Yeah, I don't know if that answers it.
No, definitely. Yeah. Regarding experience, so obviously over your years of being a professional, and even as an artist as well, what is the most notable thing that you either have changed or addressed that was bothersome for you early on? Whether that might be a specific thing when you tried a new technique or skill, or that was always like, that monkey on your back that was always holding you back until you kicked it off.
Probably lighting, I think, is a big one. Yeah. A lot of my early work, which is deleted now, they were feeling very flat, like the forms. Like I used to do a lot of sci-fi work, like sci-fi, because yeah, but it had no form, and it was just like coming from the lighting. Like the way I would approach things was I would just like slap in some silhouettes, throw some photos on it and not pay too much attention to the lighting. But lighting has become one of the most important things for me. It makes your design read well. It can inform the composition. It can affect the mood. It can, yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that. It affects a lot of things.
Yes.
So it's super important to me. And that's still something I think I'm quite weak at, actually. So it's something I'm constantly trying to improve.
Well, that was a surprise to hear, because I just want to look at your work. The first thing that hits me is the lighting. So like, yeah, this is like, this is, I guess, the biggest voice in what you create. But then equally understanding, obviously, the journey of an artist, like that makes sense, that was something that you wanted to improve on. Was that always something that you kind of like knew, okay, I wish I just had this from the get-go? Or was it something that, again, like you realized that, okay, what is missing in this work? Oh, it's this. And then you addressed it.
I actually didn't realize it. I got feedback from I would say he's an acquaintance, but he's a super nice guy. Reese Griffiths. He was one class above me in FZD, and sometimes he was just like commenting on my stuff. He just messaged me one day. He's like, "Yo, your stuff is really cool, but everything's reading really flat." I'm like, "Oh damn, you're right, actually. Like there's like absolutely no lighting." And like kind of since that point I was trying to fix it pretty much. So
nowhere near on your level, but that's something that like I've been obsessed about for a number of years now, just lighting in general, and just how to either understand it and deploy it. And sometimes I just find myself just staring at it hypnotically, like seeing how it's done, especially in old masterwork, like the way they managed to nail that, like from such a long time ago, and use it in very, very clever ways that can be like, it just captures your attention, which is, I guess, with anything, like in the natural kingdom, all it wants to do is catch your attention for whatever purpose it has, whether it's like pollinate or whatever, right? And obviously when you make something commercial, you want it to be bought or paid for. So I can see why it's useful in that instance. But then also when you're looking at the themes in it, and you mentioned mood as well, it's like, is there anything else that can convey those things, or maybe express emotion or trigger something in the viewer more than light? I don't know.
Yeah. No, you're right. Like it's very key to, a lot of ways we feel about paintings. A lot of it comes from light, for sure. You can have like an amazing design, but if the lighting is off and not complementing that design, it can be a real shame sometimes. And like I've been there, so it's like I've had that problem. So it's just like I wouldn't even say it's like a technicality of art. It's like a fundamental. Yes. And it's just one of those ones that you can always improve on too. So I tend to look at a lot of inspiration for lighting. I actually look at a lot of games for lighting. I really like how they design light to kind of lead the player into the environment sometimes. And it's kind of the same as a composition, because you want to lead the viewer into certain parts of the image. So like the way level designers do their light, I think in a lot of ways is similar to how artists should do it.
Oh, sick. Yeah, I've noticed that too, and I was like, one way I wish I never noticed it, because sometimes I like to be like, I don't like to see the behind the curtain. I was like, oh yeah, I did that myself, I'm such a super genius. Then you realize that you just got coaxed into it. But yeah, as a narrative tool, and even in any aspect, obviously you mentioned like we were talking about battleships earlier, and any kind of vehicles, especially like utility vehicles, the way lighting is used in systems just to keep things organized. That's another rabbit hole I've found myself really fascinated by, like what these particular mean and all that kind of stuff. But you mentioned there about lighting as well, like with studying it. At this point now, would you say, and obviously like with anything, we'll definitely put that disclaimer out there with art, like that you never reach any perfect limit, is always stuff to improve on.
of course.
But when you're using light now, do you use it with almost like comfort? Like I assume that obviously when you got a pencil in your hand, you know exactly what to do with it and what you're going to get from it as well. Is that the same thing with you with lighting now? So you know that, okay, I know how to deploy lighting and what tools I need to use to get the effect I want to, or is it something that you still wrestle with?
I think I'm more comfortable with it for sure, but there are a lot of situations that I get myself into, and it's like, why isn't this working?
Yes.
And then I tweak the like sun angle in like Blender or whatever, like just a little bit, and it like affects. It has such a dramatic effect on the whole image, and it's like, okay, that's why it was the light. So sometimes it can also be, it can be a bit dangerous because you're constantly experimenting with like different lighting, and in 3D it's so easy to just constantly be changing it around just to find that perfect complement of light. But yeah, it can be a struggle sometimes for sure. Like I wouldn't say I get it 100% all the time. Sometimes I get lucky and it just like clicks immediately, but
yeah.
other times I'm kind of battling with it. So you just have to practice it more, I guess.
What do you do to work on your lighting? Like, obviously we mentioned references as well, or maybe even like techniques or studies you're doing. Like, is there anything, are you someone who does some, I guess, like homework before a project? So like maybe studying or work on some techniques before you get into the project? Or do you learn and study within that particular project, if that makes sense?
I think I kind of wing it a lot of the time. I did go through a phase when I was doing studies, but I'm like, I've kind of replaced that with like client work in a way, because I've been working with Magic the Gathering now as a part-time illustrator for quite some time now, and that's almost like my excuse to do studies, because
yes,
and it's also an excuse for me to jump out of 3D as soon as possible and just practice the more painterly side of things rather than a fleshed out realistic image. So I've been learning a lot on the job from that, which has been really rewarding and a lot of fun.
Do you find learning on the job or during a project versus a deliberate, like, I guess, lesson or study, have you noticed like one gives you better results than the other, one provides more information to you than the other?
I think learning on the job for sure, because at the end of the day you get feedback and you learn from that, and I think just from my own personal experience, getting that first in-house job, where it was like, I don't know if they like really want to hire me, but they did, and like everyone else is like much better than me, and they're giving you feedback and stuff like that. So during those times, that's where you just like go from here to you just level up so much.
And do you have like a preference, like because obviously, like you said, like that's definitely still comes with like maybe some uncertainty or maybe some anxiety when you're on the job, because obviously there's deliverables that need to be met. I guess when you're kind of doing things at your own pace, there's like a safety zone, because you kind of know that you're going to keep yourselves in that, like, not really going to push yourself to the edge limit, so to speak. So with that in mind, like, do you have a preference in that regard, or do you kind of like to be more almost put against the ropes and then learn that way?
I prefer client work in the sense that you have that deadline, and you have to do everything you can to make it as good as you can. Maybe it won't be as polished as your personal work, but you still try your best to get a decent image out. But that deadline is the most important thing, because as I mentioned right in the beginning, I was lacking that kind of self-discipline, and sometimes I go through those phases these days as well, where I'm feeling particularly kind of lazy with personal work, and it's not only that, it's also with personal work, because it means so much to you. you kind of you can very easily go through this endless loop of iteration. Like, I'm feeling like this design isn't quite there yet. I'll try another one.
Yes.
And then another one, and then another one. Sometimes, and then sometimes it just clicks. But having that deadline, you kind of have to do it no matter what. So I kind of prefer it in a sense, even though it may be stressful at times.
Yeah, there's like, it's a weird way because you can't really prefer. There's no such thing as like preferring to be put, I guess, at the edge of a plank, to use a pirate analogy, and like do your best work that kind of way, because you're fighting for survival kind of thing. But almost like you have to be put in that situation. Like, I don't know, like, I guess I'm trying to get, like, you can't really put yourself there. You have to be put there kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can't manufacture it artificially and then kind of then that way. Which I always think, like, with art and stuff, as much as I love doing personal stuff, there is something that, whether either working with others or working on a project or whatever, like, it does bring something out that I don't think, at least what I've experienced, that you can't really bring out yourself. Is that something that you've experienced?
Yeah, sorry. Could you repeat it? I'm sorry. It's kind of
no, it's okay. So like, versus, I guess, like a better way to frame it, like versus personal work and client work or professional work, do you work in different ways?
Well, client work, you kind of have to go through those early stages of iteration, right? That kind of almost kind of like design stage, which is something I'm trying to do now in my personal work as well. Like before, just like, because I usually have the idea like pretty early on, and like I kind of have a really specific idea of what I want. But now what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to treat it like client work and be like, how can I expand on that idea or, do variations of it before committing to it, so I don't waste a bunch of time, because that can happen really easily. You can, like, if you're just working on your image right from the start, no sketches, nothing, you just jump straight in, and halfway through, maybe you spent like 5 hours or something in it, and you're starting to realize, I'm not feeling it. And it's like, that could have been sorted out in the sketch phase.
Yes.
It's a good habit to try and dish that out, even though you may not find it as fun as, like, fleshing out the final stage.
Yeah. You mentioned a while ago about, like, especially with the Magic the Gathering work, like almost getting out of 3D. What's that like? Like, because it's a loaded question, because I personally believe, like, there's, like, if you stick to one particular, I guess, medium or discipline, you lose some things in other ways and you gain some things in other ways. So what's it like, I guess, switching? Because I imagine that with personal stuff, it's a good blend of more 3D heavy and then 2D. Yeah. So what's that like?
It's a good challenge, and I love a good challenge. I think it's really fun, actually, just to get an idea of what you can actually do without the 3D help, because like, what happens if, like, the developer of your favorite add-on on Blender has, like, passed away or something. This is like years in the future, right? And like it stops being developed.
Yes, good point.
And then you suddenly find yourself without that tool that you've always relied on. So, just testing yourself and see what you can do without it is a lot of fun. And, I would recommend it. Like, even if it's just like, not client work, but, personal stuff. Like, if you're just doing like studies or something, I know a lot of artists tend to do studies, and, I 100% understand why, because it's kind of the same thing. It's just like testing yourself. Like, can I actually do this without the support of a program? And there may be like situations as well, like in your work, like client work, where they've asked you not to take it so far in 3D, and then you may find yourself in trouble then as well, because you've relied so heavily on it. So it's nice. It's like it's kind of a nice balancing act, I would say.
Sick.
Yeah.
And what have you noticed that in 2D, for example, that you're either getting better results at, or maybe seeing things in a clearer way, if that makes sense, by doing things 2D versus say 3D, or vice versa?
What it's helped me a lot actually is because when I work with 3D, at least when I was starting out, I was very precious about it. It's like, oh, it looks so nice and crisp. I don't want to touch it. But it's kind of forced me to just like drop out of it super quickly and mess it up with like some brush strokes. And I just feel like really comfortable like painting over it now. So yeah, it's been cool.
How do you think, like, from the lighting aspect, do you think you learn more, I guess, painting light or using light 2D versus 3D?
That's a good one. I think a bit of both, because on one hand, if you're doing studies, you learn about lighting in the material sense. So you learn how to paint your metals, you learn how to paint translucent water, and you're really analyzing how these things should react, right? And if you don't have that knowledge and you're in 3D, your render will be less realistic, most likely, because you don't have a true understanding of how water, for instance, would react in real life. But because you've done the studies, you tried and failed to try and get it right. You've gone through it and you kind of know what to do in 3D. So I think 2D helps a lot in the material sense, but I think if you're lighting your scene in 3D and you're just kind of, paying not much attention to it, you're just like, okay, I'll just backlight this subject matter and call it a day. I don't think you will learn much, but if you're really kind of like tweaking it and, trying different angles, analyzing what it's bringing focus to, maybe your lighting is bringing focus to something that shouldn't be in focus. And, that's when you kind of have a problem. And if you're thinking about it actively, while changing your lighting, then I think you can learn a lot for sure. You'll figure out what kind of angles work for you versus what doesn't.
Sick. Yeah. No, I totally agree with that, and that's something that I'm finding as well. Now, what would you say, analyzing yourself now at this stage in your life and career, at least in technical aspect, lighting was one of them, and that's something that you've been able to, I'll speak for you, but like say conquer, and then obviously use to your advantage. What's the next thing? Is there something else that's kind of like, okay, I want to apply that same progress to something else?
Well, probably design, I would say. I've kind of gotten into a bit of like the people I've surrounded myself with since being in the UK have been really heavy into design. And for me, I've always been a person who's been interested in a little bit of both. I've been really interested in like really artsy images, but also interested in well-designed images.
Yeah.
But I think in my work, I've lent towards more of the art side of things versus design for sure. And that's something I'm trying to lean back into now and try and flesh that out a bit more, which is
cool.
Also very challenging.
Definitely. Now, regarding your career, what's that journey been like now? So you're saying it's purely freelance right now, yeah?
Yeah, freelance. It's had its ups and downs. It's been pretty consistent, thankfully, though. So, I've been thankful for that. Anything in particular? Because
yeah, sure. So So you worked in studio and you've worked in freelance, right? Which one have you done, like an equal amount for both, or has it been like more freelance versus studio?
I think I got like 3 or 4 years as a freelancer now, including those early days in 2016, versus about I would say it's about equal, I guess, around now. Yeah, it's probably equal.
So that's a good way to kind of like judge both scenarios. Obviously, it's always like when you dissect anything away from its whole, it doesn't really tell the full story because sometimes they all feed into each other. But let's pretend it does. And which one, like, I guess, how would you compare both? And do you have a preference for one over the other?
I'm leaning to, I think, I'm leaning towards in-house, maybe a bit better. Just because of the fact that you're, if you're in a studio with, and it's usually the case, you're in a studio with people that are much better than you. For personal growth, you're just going to be learning a lot more. And you just feel a bit more connected with the industry in general. But when I say a bit better, I'm saying like freelance is here, and it's not like a huge margin. Sure. Because there's a lot of nice things about freelance. Yes. A lot more time for yourself, personal development. And if you have like a reliable kind of friend group that can give you feedback, that kind of can cancel out, the stuff from the studio. But so far I've just been enjoying both, to be honest. Like, I would go back to either or. Yeah. And kind of just like, I don't know, like grifter or something. Just kind of going where the wind takes me,
Fair enough. Yeah, that was gonna be my next question. Like, how did this pan out? Like, is it just something that you've fallen into, and that's just the way, I guess, the way the cards got dealt, or was it more strategic and you maneuvered your way? Because I've spoken to, like, I guess, I'm definitely someone who just fell into things. Like, it's just like the ball's still rolling down the hill, and I'm just hitting these rocks and getting misdirected here, there, and everywhere. Whereas others have been more like very ninja about it and like kind of very deliberate with their moves. I'd love to know your journey in that regard.
I mean, I would like to say I'm like a ninja and everything's super calculated, but it's not. No. Yeah, I would say the jump I made recently from studio to in-house, I think that was probably the only one that was maybe a bit calculated, because I was getting freelance for Halo at the time. Ooh. And that was just like, career-wise, I felt like I had to jump on it. So, and I needed the extra time. Because it got a bit tricky because I was still in-house and I was just kind of getting destroyed time-wise. Like, I was just like working 24/7 pretty much. And I was just like, this has to change. Like, I can't, I'm getting too old for this. I can't manage all these jobs at once. So I made the conscious decision to just jump into freelance, and yeah.
Cool. And when you were in studio, as you mentioned there, like about, so you get like freelance gigs on the side as well as studio as well?
Yeah.
How was that like? Or what was that experience like? I guess, as you mentioned there about having long days, give us an example of like what that particular day would be like.
So I would commit to my work job, and I would treat it as if like, because, I think like regularly I would have done my work job, and then after that I would just like, chill, like maybe do some personal work, or maybe, play some games or something. And all it is really was just kind of replacing that chill time with, with work. And then I would still have maybe 2 hours at the end of the day to, at like 11 p.m., 12 a.m. So, I'm not a night owl, but I do like late nights still sometimes. It's just the way I am. It's how I'm wired. So it was manageable. It was definitely manageable. Like, I think most people can definitely handle 2 jobs at the same time if you're fast. like I know some people that do 3 and sometimes even 4. So, which is too crazy for me. I've never been able to do that. But it was, just to summarize it, it was hard, but it was worth it. Like, I managed to save up quite a lot of money, and give myself the space to freelance, because if you're considering freelance, I would highly recommend you have a bit of money saved before you jump into it. Have something going for you before diving into that, because, especially with how the industry is at the moment, you can find yourself you can find like pretty large gaps between work. So you need to be prepared for that.
Yeah. And would you say like freelance is something that's obviously it's all dependent on opportunities and what's around the corner, but is this your groove now, would you say?
Yeah, I've gotten pretty used to it. So, like I said, if an opportunity arrives where it's like a really cool project, but it's, in-house or something, then like maybe I'll consider it. But I feel like we're just so settled into Newcastle now. It's just like, it feels like home, and I kind of like don't want to move anywhere really. Yeah. It's just like, I really like it here. So if possible, I would like to keep up the freelance, but we'll see how things go.
Sure. Halo, what was that gig like? So you made the jump. Firstly, I guess we could break into 2 parts. More specifically, I can see what the project was like, as to what you can speak about. But more so, because that was one that I guess convinced you to make the jump, to make the break from like studio to independently freelance, right?
Yeah.
Was that decision easy?
It wasn't easy, because I had a really stable job, and it was a good job too, and I had an amazing team. But I guess all I could say is the style of the project was very different to what I do professionally. And when you commit to a game studio, it's a long commitment. It's like, maybe it'll take 5 years for the game to come out. Maybe it'll take 3. Maybe it'll take 8 if it's a troubled development. So I felt like, because I've been a little bit unlucky in the sense that most of the games I've worked on, I haven't been able to share anything from it. So that's why I was getting a bit concerned. Like, my portfolio is mainly just personal work. So I had to work on something a bit more fast paced. And that was Halo, very fast paced. And it was an awesome job, because actually I was working on it with one of my best friends, Joao Silva. He was one of my classmates at FZD, and he brought me onto the project. Sick. And it was the first time I got to work on a project with like a really good friend of mine. Yeah. And that was super fun. Yeah.
Sick. What was that like? Like, I guess I get where you're coming from as well. Like, just someone that's more than a familiar face, because you kind of know them, how they tick and how you tick, and there's that level of collaboration that it brings out that takes a while if you work with someone new. But what was it like? Like, just it's basically, like working with someone that you know.
I mean, so he was on the project like way before I was on. So first of all, just seeing like the stuff he did, it was just like super inspiring to me. And it's like, oh, okay, that's a really high bar to reach. So that was awesome. And yeah, also kind of like, if there was ever like a problem on the project, I could like back and forth with him, and we can like try to solve it together. And that was really cool. It was like being in a studio pretty much. If you're just like sitting next to a colleague who you really respect, you can just like ask them for feedback, or you can give them feedback, and that back and forth was just really awesome. And I feel like that's one of the downsides of freelance. It's like you don't get that too often, unless you're working with it on a project with someone So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
And you mentioned about being fast paced. What was it like specifically, like from that jump? Like, I guess because there's for those that are listening who are completely fresh to the industry, who are just like trying to just figure out, because we've all been there when you're trying to break in, like figure out, okay, what's it really going to be like on a job? What does this mean versus that? Explain to those guys that are listening, like the difference in pace, and I guess how that looked from a work standpoint.
So it kind of went, so like in game development, I was kind of used to like almost like a kind of like weekly turnaround, like including feedback. So it would be like, you get the brief, gather your reference, do some quick sketches. That would take maybe like 1 or 2 days, depending on the topic. You get feedback, and then you would like flesh it out maybe for the rest of the week with feedback on top of that. Versus Halo, which is like you're trying to get everything done like 1 day or 2 days. Luckily, our producer was actually quite lenient. If I compare Halo to my very first film job, which was Ghost in the Shell, time-wise, Halo was much more lenient, and they kind of gave us a little bit of extra time to push the finish a little bit more than usual. So that was really cool.
And
yeah,
what's that like in terms of mindset? Like, is that something that you could naturally switch to, or was it a shock to the system, or did you kind of anticipate that and like you knew it was coming and you kind of like brace yourself for that?
I was
workload?
expecting it to be a lot worse, to be honest.
Okay,
so I was kind of like prepared. I was like, okay, this is going to be like super hardcore.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to grind like crazy, but it actually wasn't so bad. So I was a little bit prepared mentally. But the most challenging thing about it, and I can't talk about it too much, but the most challenging thing about it was just the subject matter, which is sci-fi. And if you look at my portfolio, I'm not really a sci-fi person. So
So you call yourself a non-sci-fi person. Is that by choice, or have you rejected sci-fi?
I haven't rejected it. I love sci-fi. Okay. Like I've got, Star Wars in the background, it's what got me into the industry, actually.
Sure.
Like, all the Ralph McQuarrie artworks and stuff. Mm-hmm. So I love it. It's just, I feel like, maybe it comes from a place of insecurity a little bit, but I feel like the bar for sci-fi is just so high these days. Mm-hmm. And, there's such amazing designers, and I felt like if I wanted to focus on something, it would be something I'm more interested in, which is things with historical ties, because I'm such a fan of history. So I still like to do, I wouldn't say I've abandoned it. Like I might revisit it after I've learned some things a bit, but, we'll see.
I guess I admire it because it's almost like choosing a child, like your favorite child. So you get rid of one, kind of like, just send it some allowance every so often, but you hope to focus on that one that I guess maybe interests you more. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I think it's respectable, not the abandoned child bit, but more like just going for something that interests you. And is it more so like an interest of that subject matter? Is that what really kind of got you to focus more on that side of things?
Yeah. It's 100% the interest. Yeah.
Sick. I think that's good as well, purely because from people I generally speak to, not just only in art, but in life anyway, that doesn't happen a lot. Like people just going for what's not just specifically them, but more so what really speaks to them. Mm-hmm. And often that little voice, and I'm very speaking in abstract terms, so forgive me if it's very ambiguous, but it's like, that's often ignored because I guess out of like sense of security or for what's needed or whatever. And I get the reasons why. I've done it many times in my life as well. But when you kind of like follow it, then you go down those rabbit holes and you kind of like, I don't know, it just gets... Do you find that it gets something more out of you that you probably can't if you're doing something that doesn't kind of like click or connect with you in that way? If that makes sense?
Yeah, because I think you just care about it more. You want to... You really want to push it to make it more interesting. And if it's something you're knowledgeable about, you kind of know how to push it in a more interesting way. Whereas with sci-fi, like I always felt like I reached a certain point and it's like, I actually have no idea what to do next. Like I have the shape, like, but it doesn't feel interesting. And it's just like, okay, I don't, like, I'm kind of like checked out at this point. It's just like something. But if it's a subject matter that you've read about a lot, you've watched videos on, and you just like, you have like all this background on it, you have that experience to push past that point and take it to the next level. So yeah.
I mean, personally speaking, like just At school, that was one of the subjects I enjoyed more than others, purely because of just like, I honestly think it's not more so just because I enjoy the subject. I think it was, we had these like textbooks at the time that you kind of like had the acetate page. And then if you peeled it back, it would show you like the cutouts of the huts or how they lived and stuff. I remember seeing that in the Egyptian times and Roman times, and that just fascinated me because it was like, I guess, a connection of illustration, design, and just nerding out on history. So I've always like geeked out on what's of interest in me. I'm not like a complete super, you know, I'm definitely going to sound a lot more basic compared to probably what your knowledge about history and stuff, but it's definitely something that basic. Okay, fair enough then. But it's definitely like something that like it gets the inspiration juices flowing, creative juices flowing. It's just like, I don't know what it is about learning about our past. That's maybe it's like, I don't know, biological thing. Like it's important. The reason why we have brains that are quote unquote intelligent is because we need to retain that information and process in different ways and interpret it. And learning from history is the best way to learn about how people made mistakes or successes. Place that you visited or any particular times in history or locations that really have resonated with you, whether it's turned into an art project or not? Like what really has been like, when you think of like history and historical things, okay, that is where my mind jumps to straight away.
Probably 3. Age of Sail. And I'm really fascinated by the period in Japan when it's called like the Bushin War. Okay. When kind of American and European arms were coming into Japan and how it changed that society for better or for worse. That's a really interesting period in time. And they were also, part of it is also because they had really interesting ships that didn't last a very long time. They were, you know, they started to develop these steamships and stuff like that. But yeah, very interesting period of time, you know, traditional versus modern. Yeah. So that's 2. The third one, yeah. I get, you know, I could probably turn it into 10 really easy. No, let's go to 10. Easily. Go ahead, don't worry, man, don't worry. There's no constraints, go ahead. Yeah, I would just say for the third one, yeah, possibly, possibly World War One, because again, it's just, it's that transition of humanity. You know, we're going from like monarchies into like a modern world, and yeah, you know, it's obviously a horrible thing that happened, but I find all the tech that went into it like very interesting. You know, all the super random weapons they were using, how they were using kind of Napoleonic tactics like at first, and how it developed into like trench and tank warfare. Yeah. It's just super interesting. Obviously really sad that it happened, but you know. No, exactly. Like it's one of those things where when you look at things from distance, it's like, oh, cool. Like I went to Rome many years ago. I say many because it's like been about 5 now, but it still feels like I went a few years ago. That was like, I understood that I was going to see some historical stuff. Yeah, I didn't expect to be so blown away at a deeper level by what I saw. And also, you don't realize how old that stuff is. Like some of the parts in Rome, it's just like it's crumbling. It's like so old. But in a way where it's like people still living around it. Yeah, like it's not like protected, and it kind of is, but it's not like say if you visited stuff here like where Stonehenge or like protected places, kind of behind a rope. What is it, velvet rope? You can look at it, don't touch kind of thing. Whereas over there, it's like built on top of, and many towns in Europe, like London's a famous one, where you've got civilization stacked on civilization. It's all kind of like blended together, to the point where you don't even realize which era began when. And yeah, like Colosseum was like quite a cool thing. Obviously, it's a famous one, probably one of the things that everyone goes to visit. But then, like, almost, I was talking about this with my wife the other day. Like, was just talking about a time there, and I remember just standing there, just really like trying to like recreate what it was like back then. Like, this was a place of death, basically. People were going there like to watch a football match, cheering at people to murder each other, kind of thing. And just imagining like even the sensory aspect, like, like what did it smell like? What was it like? All that kind of stuff. And I remember nerding out on documentaries where they kind of like try to recreate how they
gave shade to people, and like they had those kind of like I guess like almost like sales, so to speak. They could retract them and all these kind of things, which makes sense because it was a need at the time, and they would have figured it out. And then, I don't even know where I'm going with this as well, but it's just something about like trying to understand what people's motivations were, why they did things, and I believe that was the first use of concrete, which is almost like a staple to civilization moving forward, and then even, I guess maybe, turning fighting into a product, a commercial product, where even now all of our stadiums are built like a coliseum, and any sport you go to is just watching, figuratively now, people kill each other, so to speak, and the winner takes all kind of thing. Over there is more literal, and that's like over thousands of years, and it's mind-boggling.
It's strange because I'm not a big sports person. It's always felt like something that's like very tribal in a sense to me, even now.
For sure.
Because you have all these like opposing fans, like swearing and like very violent towards each other.
Yes.
It's like, okay, wow.
Yeah, I mean, like obviously being in the UK now, you probably noticed about the football rivalries, and it is normally someone who's like 2 doors away from you, who you, when it comes to match day, you actually hate them, but then for the rest of the year, you're like going for drinks or whatever. It strange, but it's cool.
Yeah, it's just like when it happens, everyone just suddenly becomes like super tribal, and it's kind of interesting in its own way, but it's not interesting when it's right outside your door for sure.
Oh, of course. Now, obviously, like as being an artist, one of the obvious things is when you're looking at things like history and like certain regions and certain times is the visual aspect, like the how things work, how things connected, how people moved in and around. And I was watching something historical recently, and I was just thinking, like, for no obvious reason, it was not even part of the story or the plot. I was thinking, that's the tools they had. How did they move all these things to get there? I was thinking, me in those shoes, I'd be annoyed dragging my luggage in that aspect, or what would I carry and that kind of stuff. What other things that are not visual that you look at as a creative to fuel either the project or to make sense of that history that you're trying to observe and understand?
Not visual. I feel a bit stuck on this one. All right, could I get the question again? Maybe it'll help me.
Yeah,
out.
sure. So I guess like, let me try and figure a better way to rephrase it. But I guess like more so things like when do you observe or study the people of that time, like what their motivations were, what they were thinking, why they did the things they did regarding their culture and stuff, and then kind of see how that translates into maybe why the architecture is built in a certain way, or why they did things. Like, do you go down those rabbit holes as well?
A little bit, I would say, yeah, for sure. Because it's like if you take a look at colonialism, which can be quite a dark topic, right? But their kind of like mindset was, our societies are so grand, they're so important, and that's reflected in like the architecture that they built around the world as well. So there are like little things like that for sure. I can't think of too many on the top of my head, unfortunately, but I guess that's one. But
so skipping past history, but to another history, you growing up, what was that like as a creative? Because creative kids, they have a specific way of, I guess, like existing and being into things and being inspired by things. What did that look like for you?
I think, the interest for history, what sparked it was probably from games because, like I said, I kind of started taking interest in these like really nerdy kind of like strategy games like that most people would kind of gloss over, but it has a really niche kind of audience, and like I think most people who play those, they go down these historical rabbit holes, and it influences their fascination with it in real life too. So that's probably like where it stemmed from. Not necessarily school, although I did take it in school. And it was one of my favorite ones, but at school it's like presented in a really dry manner,
Mm-hmm.
but games kind of represent it in a more fun way, and
Mm.
I guess maybe a more accessible way. So you kind of find out about this thing, and because it was so fun and accessible, you can kind of lean into it
Mm.
in the real world. So yeah.
And what about like just in general terms, like non-historical stuff, but like just stuff that really connected to you as a kid? Like, were there any like kind of like films or games or even books even that were like kind of like, I guess you could see really shaped you into the creative that you are today?
So for games, probably my biggest influence is the Fallout series. Post-apocalypse has been interesting for me as well. um, I That's actually one subject matter that I may touch on in the future within my own art as well, because I
Cool.
like it so much.
Cool.
Just how wacky everything gets after the end of the world.
Yeah.
Um, Movies, Lord of the Rings, probably my biggest inspiration. That just had such a huge effect on me, and I think what they did for those films, how they pulled a lot of the design, just from the visual sense, how they pulled a lot of the designs from real world cultures, changed it slightly, made it more fantastical. That was super interesting to me, and that's something I try to do, like ever since seeing that. But yeah, oh, it's so good. And just it's just the way it teaches you, how to be kind to others. It's just a solid movie overall, and if you watch that at a really young age, I'm sure it's just going to influence you a ton, because
How old are you when you watched it? Did you read the books before, or have you only watched the films?
No, I did read the books, but I watched it first because I think I was pretty young when they started coming out. I can't remember how old I was really, but
Okay.
I do know I was like a kid for sure.
Sick. Yeah, same. Like Lord of the Rings is, I'm gonna bite my tongue because I would not shut up about it. But yeah, when you're talking earlier about like that fort, that castle, and like how it's like basically dictated by the surrounding it's in, I was just thinking about Gondor, how it was designed in the movies,
exactly,
and
right? Yeah.
even Helm's Deep. It was almost like you forget when you look at nature, like how hard it is to just shape nature. We always tend to like work around it when you look at like mountain roads, or whatever. So it just makes sense that nature would shape your civilization versus the other way around. And I feel Lord of the Rings is one of those that nails it for sure.
Yeah, I love how it has that theme of mankind versus nature as well, which is very interesting to me as well, and it also ties into the sea pretty well, because the sea is or the ocean, it's one of those things that always gets the better of mankind, like once we get too arrogant, like Titanic, indestructible ship, look what happened. Even recently with Ocean Gate. Really sad, but it's what happens when humans kind of forget their place within the world, and we get a little bit too excited about our own capabilities, a little bit too arrogant, and then nature's always there to remind us, not so fast.
Is that a hint at what might be a theme in one of your post-apocalyptic projects?
Maybe. Could be, for sure.
Marco, so we'll look at wrapping this up soon.
Okay.
Personal nerd out question for myself is more like your tools. So what are your tools that you kind of like go-to tools that you use right now? And do you see yourself maybe looking at other tools or developing like a workflow on other ones, or are you kind of happy with your workflow right now?
Yeah, pretty Standard. Blender, Photoshop. I actually got my start with 3D modeling with 3D Code, actually with Learn Squared, Yama's course.
Cool.
So that's how I got into 3D, because it was just a really easy program to approach. I tried other ones like 3ds Max and Maya, and I just couldn't do it. And then 3D Code came. It's like, okay, I can, finally something I can understand. And then Blender came, which is also really easy to approach. So Blender, 3D Code, Photoshop, and I'm kind of dipping my toes into ZBrush now, and I'm possibly looking to replace 3D Coat with ZBrush, because ZBrush is a lot of fun and there's just so much potential for really high detailed sculpts. And what I'm looking towards, possibly, maybe Unreal, maybe, because I think I could do. I don't want to make like false promises, but like I do want to experiment with my my personal project in Unreal, and see what comes of that. But that's it's a huge time sink, so kind of like cautiously approaching it at the moment. Yeah.
Sick. Marco, it was absolutely amazing chatting with you. Any final thoughts or wisdom you want to bestow to the listeners before we go?
Pull from the real world, as mundane as it might seem. You never know what it could, what ideas it could spark. So always seek that inspiration. It's all around you. You just have to look outside. That's about it, really.
Awesome. Marco, thanks so much. It's great.
I had a lot of fun. Thanks, Aaron.
A huge thanks to Marco for jumping on. And be sure to hit the links to give him a follow and see what he is up to. Then head to learnsquare.com and take courses like Marco did to enrich your creative journey today. I've been your host, Aaron Danda. Till next time.